Okay, so has anyone got any questions about 4, 5, 6, and 7? Here we go. First question.
A number of questions, but maybe I'll just start with one and see if other people have questions. But I do have a list of questions. First question is, have any of you heard of the Gentle Path through the 12 Steps? No.
Has any of us heard of the Gentle Path through the 12 Steps?
No.
It's a workbook on the 12 Steps.
No.
I guess that from Patrick Hans.
There are lots of different workbooks.
Yeah, okay.
So
just
yeah.
asking if you're okay, so then scrap that one. I'll just start with two questions. Number one, I find the practical process of writing step 4, as it's brought in the big book, very rigid, and I find, it might be that I'm not doing it with my sponsor because he's overseas and I'm supposed to call him, but as of now, he gives me direction, but I'm just following what he said, but I'm not sitting with him and doing each question with him together, and I find it very rigid, and I don't necessarily relate to all the details, like the 7 parts of self, and the resentments that I write, I don't necessarily always feel that they connect to one of those 7 parts of self, or what are the 4 things that I've done wrong, self-seeking, afraid, selfish, or the 4th one? Dishonest, yeah. I don't know, I just feel the whole thing a little bit rigid, and I don't know, I find a hard time relating to it. That's question number 1. Question number 2 is also I find it very depressing that the whole stress is about character defects, and we don't discuss the character assets as well. Those are my 2 questions.
Okay. Should I take a crack at it?
Go on. Would you just summarize that question, because I'm not sure the question will get recorded from here, so...
It's a long question.
This is the
Part
process
1
of
of
doing
the
step
question,
4,
yeah, is the process of doing step 4. And number 1, there are parts of self which don't get addressed in step 4. And secondly, the character assets are not looked at. Let me take the second question first. My assets won't get me drunk. Therefore, I don't need to spend a great deal of time on them. Because for me, this is about recovery from a hopeless condition. And my condition is truly hopeless. And for the sake of efficiency, I need to get rid of the bad stuff so that the good stuff can come up. I'm going through step 4 to be rid of my resentment, my fear, my guilt, and my shame. I don't need to look at my generosity and decency in this process. That's the first part. The second part is, look, step 4 is not an intellectually complicated exercise. It is a simple exercise. There are many areas of self. You could look at Freud, you can look at Jung, you can look at all sorts of, the whole school of psychology, and there are manifold areas of self that are not addressed. Step 4 is not intended to be a deep analysis of the human ego. It's meant to be a straightforward and simple exercise that gears itself to people who are in a pretty desperate state and who need a spiritual solution. And how do you get to the spiritual solution as quickly as possible? And therefore, I know that in my 3rd column that what I'm trying to do is really put my finger on why Susie pissed me off, right? And those questions, is it pride, self-esteem, security, ambition, personal relations, or sex relations, they're trying to get to a basic premise, and that is, other people need to behave well, so I'm okay. So, as long as I believe that the behavior of other people is the factor or the variable that dictates my serenity and peace, I'm screwed, right? So my demands and expectations of other people are what's behind the 3rd column, but how you get at that, because each resentment's a little bit different in terms of how you arrive at that answer. But what I found going through step 4 is that once I've done 15 of these things, what I see is every resentment kind of looks the same once I peel back. So Susie stepped on my foot, but Billy stole my car. But what's affected is the same in each case. So let me see. Tim, do you want
Oh, yes.
to take an attempt at answering that?
Okay, so first point is, if you think about a computer, you've got some physical hardware. Then you have the software on the computer, and then you have the user. Now, what step 4 is? Well, actually, let's look a little bit more about what the software is. So the hardware is your physical body. The user is your spirit, which happens to be living in this physical body. The software is the set of ideas that you were given at some point, which you use to process everything you perceive and then direct your action. So software on a computer has input and it has output. The input is all of the things happening to you, it processes it, and then there's some output. And the reason that you're doing a step 4 is the output in your life is awful. So let's look at where the software is going wrong, because the input you're getting, same as everyone else's input, but in you it's producing terrible output. So there is a problem with the software. Now the software is the set of ideas that you were given at some point. Out of all of the ideas that you ever heard, these were the ones that you produced the software with. In step 4, we're interested in the software and what is going wrong in the software. Now, all the bits of the software which work, we don't worry about. We're just interested in the bits of the software that don't work. But the important thing is, the reason we don't need the assets is because it doesn't matter how big, how terrible the software is. We're not saying anything about you, we're saying something about your software. So you as the user of the computer, you don't judge your value as the user of the computer by how good the software is. When you bought you didn't even write the software, you bought the software from someone. So that's why when I'm doing step 4, what I was told is everything I find is everything that I'm not. It's all of the ways of behaving that I've been taught which are not natural to the child of God that I really am. It's all of the false ideas. So whatever I discover is not me anyway. So that's why I don't need to feel bad about it. I don't need to feel guilty about it. It's just bad wisdom, bad processing. In terms of getting step 4 to actually mean something, that's a tricky question. One thing that's really helpful, sometimes people say, oh, I don't have any resentments, I'm a very nice person. But although so you've got 3 main inventories. You've got the resentment inventory, you've got the fear inventory, you've got the sex inventory. Now the resentment inventory, you'd think, well, it's just about resentments, but it's not. It says, in dealing with resentments, so, well, it is about resentments. In dealing with resentments, we set them on paper. We listed people, institutions, principles with whom we were angry. Oh, okay, so it's not just resentment, it's resentment and anger. We asked ourselves why we were angry, blah, 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 blah. Our personal relationships were hurt or threatened. So this is about where I'm resentful, angry, hurt and threatened. Then sore or burned up, where I feel injured, where I feel that I'm being interfered with in some way. So actually, it's an index, not just resentment, it's an index of any situation which upsets me in any way at all. So everything falls within the scope of this inventory. And then, with the 7 areas of self, sometimes the words pride, self-esteem, personal relations, sex relations, ambition, security, and pocketbooks, when I say, well, which of these areas does it affect, I might not connect to those words, which is why I was given definitions of those words for the purposes of this exercise. So definitions which are slightly different than the dictionaries, definitions which are slightly different from what you how the words are used generally. When my pride is affected, it's because I don't like how people think about me, their view of me. When my self-esteem is affected, I don't like my perception of myself. The image of myself I have in my own mind sucks. I don't like it. Personal relations and sex relations. Personal relations is when I don't like how you're treating me. Sex relations, it's the same but in a sexual context. Ambitions is when I don't get what I want. Security is when I don't get what I need. Pocketbooks is when my finances are affected. I have yet to find any situation where I am emotionally disturbed where one of those 7 is not affected. It's usually several of them. But if you define those 7 areas broadly enough, it does capture everything. And just one little last thing. On page 67, when you come to the 4th column, you look at your behaviour. It says, we resolutely looked for our own mistakes. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, self-seeking and frightened, blah, blah, blah. Where were we to blame? When we saw our faults, we listed them. We admitted our wrongs honestly and were willing to set matters straight. So when I do it, it's not just selfish, dishonest, self-seeking and frightened. It's where am I making mistakes? Where am I to blame? What are my faults? Which is the full list of all character defects. And lastly, the wrongs, which is where I've harmed someone else. And even if I've done nothing wrong, the fact is there is a mistaken perception there. That's why that question is so important. What were my mistakes? If I'm upset and I haven't made a mistake, I must remain upset forever. And then my emotions depend on your behaviour. I don't want that. I want to have made a mistake. I want to be wrong. Because if I've made a mistake, I can change. If I can change, your behaviour can stop affecting me. So boy, do you want to find mistakes. Then the more mistakes you get, the freer you get of the people that you don't want them to be in charge of your emotions. So that's my take on step 4. Any more questions?
Are you a saint now?
Am I what, sorry?
Are you a saint now?
Am I saying no? Unfortunately
No,
not.
how does it actually disappear, or you don't have to deal with it?
Do you want me to answer that? I think so. When I first read that step, that was a big fear of mine. That was my big question. If God removes all these defects of character, am I going to be this saint? Well, I can tell you now, after 8 years in AA, I'm certainly no saint. But it also does say in the big book that what we look for is spiritual progress rather than perfection. And there are certain character defects of mine, certain behaviours that are really, really entrenched. Really, really entrenched. And I can kind of go through the motions of God, please remove this from me, please remove this from me. And yet they're still there. I still struggle with them on a daily basis. So I'm absolutely no saint. But what I have found is that there are certain defects that used to plague me so much, which when I really focus, when I apply these steps to those problems, they loosen. They start to dissipate. They start to disappear. And then I'm like, oh, great. And, 3 weeks later, a month later, 6 weeks later, they're back again. And they hit me again. Reminds me in the big book, there's a wonderful line that what I really have is a daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of a spiritual program. So for me, every day, in order to ensure that these really manifest character defects aren't plaguing me, aren't dictating my life, I've got to be talking about the Good Samaritan, I've got to be trying to do God's will throughout the day, in the morning, during the day, in the evening. And I think we'll come on to that later. But my most glaring defect, my alcoholism, my desire to drink, that obsession to drink, or to use pornography, whatever it might be, when applying these principles and really handing that over to God, I no longer desire to drink. I'm placed in a position of neutrality. God has removed it for me. with that problem, it worked. And that gives me hope that on other problems, it too can work. Will I be a saint? Well, I'm not really interested in a saint. Progress rather than perfection. And it's continually dependent on my connection with God on a second-by-second basis. So, yeah, no saint, in short.
I am a saint, on the other hand. All my defects have been removed. And one thing that my sponsor says, which I found really helpful, was spiritual progress is only recognised in retrospect. Don't worry about your character defects today. Just try and practice the virtue correspondent with the defect today. And, 6 months down the line, you look back and I realised that, I'm no longer thinking the way I was thinking. I'm no longer behaving the way I was behaving. And it wasn't some great act of God from the heavens, and it wasn't some great act of will on my part. It's just a very, very ordinary, come to a fork in the road. Do I choose to behave or think like this? Or do I try and choose to behave or think like that? And if I choose to behave or think like this way, repeatedly over days and weeks, then gradually that defect seems, gets removed. That's what I have to say about that.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah, I'd ask regarding the principles, how can I work? I found for me it's much harder. I didn't hear from you how the all colors, how can I be more free? Because it's not a person I need to understand them. And it's a thing, I can understand it. I don't understand it, You understand?
So is the question, how do I practice these principles on a daily basis?
No. How can I do the first step and on principles in my life? I got resentment on
Principles.
Yeah.
Well, give me an example of a principle that you have a resentment against.
Yeah, my clothes, my Jewish clothes, disturb me. So what I need to understand, what in a bridge, like John said, my father and mother, I can understand, yes, I sick, and it's the thing, I don't accept, I don't know how to explain it. It's serving, how can I go to relief, okay, and...
Are you asking how to do an inventory on a principle?
Yeah.
And how you apply the bridge passage to the...
What's the bridge passage?
So you've got 3 columns. So first column, second column, third column. Then there's a page and a half from the bottom of page 65 to the middle of 67, where it's just going blah 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 before you get to write again. So no, it's later than that. It's the bit where it talks about praying for the other person and how could you escape from your resentments and so on. It's that. So you've got 2 bits of writing and it bridges the 2 bits of writing. So that's the bridge passage. And the idea of the bridge passage is to we'll take the idea of so you tell me, when you resent having to wear certain clothes, why does it affect you?
Many I can't choose my to go to the shop and choose clothes, with the freedom, my taste, every place, I'm going, everyone can see what I am, I'm a Jew, Jewish person,
So the first thing you do is, although it starts to be about a principle, pretty soon you discover in the 3rd column that, the reason I'm worried about being, let's say, in a non-Jewish area, people know you're Jewish straight away if you're dressed a certain way. So I'm worried about what other people think about me. So this is just like a normal resentment now. This is like a normal resentment against this person or that person. So there's a problem with pride. Let's say, well, I want to wear this and I have to wear that. And this is not an exclusively Jewish question. Anyone that works in an office and has to wear a suit is going to be but I don't want to wear a suit to work. There are lots of, so this is a universal problem, not a specific problem. So this will be, well, my ambition is that I want to wear what I want to wear when I want to wear it. You discover which of the 7 areas you have the problem in: pride, self-esteem. And what I do in the bridge passage is, most of the bridge passage is I've got to look at it from another angle. And with pride, there are different ways of getting over each of those problems in each of those 7 areas. And just very briefly, how I get over those. When I'm worried about pride, it's because I believe that what other people think about me means anything. That's the mistake. So that's what I write in the 4th column, is the mistake, the belief that if other people don't like me or look down on me or disrespect me, that it means that I'm worthless. That's just a mistake. Doesn't mean anything. When I have a poor image of myself, I'm forgetting that I'm a child of God. That is the solution in the self-esteem thing. With personal relations, sex relations, ambition, security, and pocketbooks, all of those 5 come back to a single mistake. And the single mistake is, I would be happy if everything were different. And I don't know about anyone else, I've had lots of experiences when I get precisely what I want, and 5 minutes later it's not good enough, and it hasn't fixed me. So when I look at resentments, doesn't matter whether it's a resentment against a person or a principle, when I look at the 3rd column and say it's personal relations, sex relations, ambition, security, pocketbooks, what's really happening is I'm upset because I haven't got my own way. But when I get my own way, I'm not happy anyway. So I'm upset because I can't have something that doesn't make me happy when I get it. And I start to see that the insanity, that I'm not unhappy because of you or him or her or this or that or the principle or the thing. I'm just unhappy and I'm blaming all sorts of things. The real reason I'm unhappy when I'm unhappy is because I'm separate from God, because I think I'm separate and different from everyone else. That's the real reason. It's all being projected out. Once that real problem is solved and I get reconnected with other people and reconnected with God, doesn't matter what happens. Doesn't matter if things go my way or not. Does that answer it? Should we see? Yes.
Just on what you just said, is there anywhere where I can find this, like what you said, the definitions of the 7
Yes.
keys of self, and the how you find the mistake? And
Absolutely. So one thing I'm going to do, there is a little list here. If you want to put your first name, email address, and number if you like as well, so that we can communicate with you, we can send stuff to you. If we hold further events, we can invite you along. But also I can give you my card at the end. There's a website on there which has got all of the material. Okay.
Other questions?
On 4, 5, 6 or 7.
Ask when doing my sex conduct, I couldn't work out the 3rd column. When I'm resentful, hurtful, or somebody frightened, it's one of these 7 powers. If I've done something wrong sexually to somebody, I couldn't work it out.
Want to take that one?
It's a little bit different when it's about our sex conduct. It's not the 4-column inventory anymore. It's on page 69, coincidentally enough. It asks a series of simple questions, which is, and have you been through these questions?
No.
Okay, so
not.
the first full paragraph of page 69, we reviewed our own conduct. So I take a pen, and I write down specifically areas of my sexual conduct that have been less than they should have been, right? So I'm going to put relationship number 1 here, relationship number 2 here. I'm going to put people I flirt with in AA meetings here, people I flirt with at work here, the hooker I hired 3 weeks ago here, and I'm going to either put names of significant romantic relationships, names of significant sexual relationships, and then I'm going to put down categories. Because if I put down everyone I've ever slept with, the list would go on forever. So I basically have the categories broken out, and then I ask each one of these questions. And I try to keep that list at about 10 or 15, 20 people max, or 20 categories of people. And then I answer the question, where was I selfish with respect to them? Where was I dishonest? Where was I inconsiderate? Whom had I hurt? So was it just that person? Or was it, if I'm sleeping with somebody's partner, how about the other partner that I hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? In relationships, that's much more applicable, right? Where were we at fault? What should we have done instead? What should we have done instead? So we simply go through and answer those questions. It's not the 4-column inventory. It's different with resentment.
Straight to the 4th column.
Yes, precisely.
Or not to the foot.
Well,
it's a separate inventory.
It's a separate, but it looks like a...
Alright, thank you.
Other questions?
I was asking, if I want to change, I want to leave my job, I want to change my clothes, so you never left your job?
Since I was the age of 22, I've either been working or in school, or in university. Since the age of 18. Okay, Ari, I resent the need to have to wake up every morning at 6:30 on the weekdays and get on the DLR, which is crowded, and go up the escalators at Monument Station and go to work. And I want to stay in bed. I want to sleep later. I want to read the newspaper. And I want to have yoga classes, and I want to exercise, and I want to see my friends. However, I think about the consequences of those actions. And the consequences of those actions are not acceptable to me. And oftentimes when I say I'm resentful that I have to get up and go to work, part of it is that I'm resentful I stayed up so bloody late last night watching BBC instead of going to bed earlier and getting 5.5 hours of sleep instead of 8 hours of sleep. So it's give and take. I mean, most of the time I find that I'm like, Tim uses this expression, I'm a sucking vortex of need, right? And what do I need? What do I want? I want money, power, prestige, comfort, sex, looks, and thrills. That's what I want. But the problem, as he said, is that when I get them, they don't do it. They'll do it for, a day, a week, a month, but eventually the shine wears off of these things. So basically, if I don't want to work, I have to accept the consequences of not having any money, of being bored all day, of not having a purpose. And so I have to bet, and part of that's being a grown-up, right? I have to work.
I think there's another question in there as well. When I do the step 4, I discover the 1,000 things that I don't like. And I discover that the reason I'm so unhappy about things is because I have 1,000 demands. The more demands I have that things be a certain way, the more unhappy I'm going to be. Once I arrive at a position of peace, there might be things that it is legitimate to change. This is where the serenity prayer comes in. The serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can. But then I would be changing from this job to that job, not because I'm angry and upset and whatever. I'm changing from this job to that job because I will be more useful in the second job. So the question of emotional disturbance is different than the question of how should I live, who do I spend my time with, where do I work. All of those, I can't let the decisions about what I do be affected by how I feel. Otherwise, it's a 7-year-old child inside me making all the decisions, and 7-year-olds don't make good decisions, which is why we don't let them vote. Shall we pause? Shall we have a little break at this one, and then 5-minute break, and then go on with 8 and 9?